The Memphis Grizzlies have traded for Luke Kennard. The Danny Green era in Memphis is over, and that seems to be it for the Grizzlies here at the trade deadline. Let's get a quick reaction to what Memphis did on trade deadline day on this emergency episode of Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This emergency episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. This episode, again, FanDuel Sportsbook is the official sportsbook of Locked On Grizzlies and Locked On Network in general. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We're also available on YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all those fun things help make our show better. It is much appreciated. I am Joe Mullinax, your host for this abbreviated version of the show. Only going to hit you up for about 15 minutes of your time. I'm looking forward to having DeMichael Cole, my co-host, with me for a full reaction episode to the league at large, what Memphis did and didn't do. But in this particular, again, about 15 minutes, just join me on a journey briefly to talk about Luke Kennard coming into Memphis and Danny Green leaving. First, I want to hit on Danny Green because I think even though he had a brief tenure with the Grizzlies, obviously he was a part of the organization for several months coming out of the trade last summer during the draft for DeAnthony Melton going to Philly. He had a veteran presence. He was somebody that surely imparted some wisdom. He did some things in his time, hitting some threes that made it look like maybe, just maybe, he could have been a contributor at the level that the Grizzlies likely needed him to be. And I don't want to belittle that, right? I don't want to make that seem like that wasn't valuable or that wasn't possibly going to be exactly what the Grizzlies needed. However, Danny Green in his most recent game essentially looked like he was getting cardio, right? When he was out there against the Bulls, not really doing a ton to help the team score and create space, and especially help in that half-court offensive set, which is where the Grizzlies are at their weakest. They are not particularly strong in that area. They needed help. Enter Luke Kennard, which I'm very interested in talking with you about on this abbreviated version of our show, this emergency pod, to talk about what Kennard will bring to the Grizzlies, because where Luke Kennard will shine for Memphis is hitting wide open threes. Per Cleaning the Glass, over the last 3,800 minutes played, Luke Kennard is shooting 45% from three. 45%. That is a remarkable marksmanship percentage. One of the best three-point shooters in the entire league is now calling Memphis home. That doesn't mean he's going to be a great defender. That doesn't mean that he's going to be able to contribute in transition. That doesn't mean that Kennard is a guy that you put in there for 30 minutes a game. His role with the Los Angeles Clippers was inconsistent. Hopefully on our next episode, our more full response to the trade deadline, we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit with our Locked On Clippers folks about what exactly Memphis can expect from Kennard. Be on the lookout for that tomorrow. I am interested in him as a floor spacer first and foremost, because in the absence of a Raptors trade, which again, we'll talk more about that in our next show, in the absence of that, something larger manifesting, I think it's really important to point out the reality of why this is happening for Memphis as a team. They need space. John Morant needs space to operate. Jaren Jackson Jr., who has shown improvement, creating off the dribble, getting to the rim from the perimeter, dunking, being aggressive at the rim. He needs room to operate. And Memphis, currently in the wing, especially among their reserves, does not have the capacity. They do not have the ability to consistently provide that space. You take Desmond Bane out of the equation for whatever reason, injury, rest during a game, whatever the case might be, Danny Green wasn't giving that to you. In a small sample size, maybe he gets back together. But he wasn't giving that to you at this stage. You couldn't count on it. You can't count on John Conchar to provide that to you. You certainly can't count on Zaire Williams to provide that to you. He does not give you that in that same way that a Luke Kennard does. He is a threat. a legitimate shooting threat that you have to account for whenever he's on the floor. And that is going to create a whole lot of room for guys like Joe Morant, for guys like Jaren Jackson Jr. to get to the basket. Your rolling bigs like Brandon Clark and Steven Adams should see a little bit more space when there wasn't some before, because you have to have somebody staying home on Kennard. And one of the positives with Kennard is he's better handling the ball than the Clippers allowed him to show. For whatever reason, he wasn't put in positions to be successful where he could be not necessarily a point guard, but a facilitator of offense off of the pick and roll in particular. Kennard is capable of doing that more than it has been let on in his moments of success with the Clippers. He was mostly a spot-up shooter, a guy that did that shooting dirty work. Where does this leave Memphis in the grand scheme of the Western Conference? We'll talk more about that on our next episode. But I do think that this allows for the Grizzlies, who gave up 3 second-round picks in addition to Green, to say that they got better at the deadline. They did. They addressed a concern. Their half-court offense should improve. It may be a marginal improvement, but improvement is still improvement. They got deeper. If Tyus Jones, Brandon Clark, and Luke Kennard are their 3 best reserves going into the playoffs, you feel better about that today than you did yesterday when you said Danny Green would have to be that 8th guy, like I've said on this show and others have said elsewhere. That is a better statement to make. And again, second-round picks were thrown around like candy at this deadline. You didn't give up any of your future firsts. You didn't lose future flexibility to do your major dealings like Zach Kleiman, the GM of the Grizzlies, and this front office prefers to do during the draft. That's been their MO. Justice Winslow was the last major trade that occurred before, at a time that wasn't in the offseason. Luke Kennard, if you count it as a major trade, is the next guy. No key piece of this Grizzlies rotation is gone. Not a single one of them. Everybody that was here that started this season that they hoped would be contributors, from Zaire Williams to John Conchar, whether they're right, they're wrong, all the different ways that you want to look at it. They didn't lose people that have been a part of the process. Danny Green has been part of the process, at least on the court, for 3 games. 3 games. Luke Kennard has played a lot more minutes than that, obviously, in recent games. Luke Kennard has been more active. He is more immediate help. You don't have to hope and pray and look to the future through a crystal ball prognosticating what Danny Green can be. You know what Luke Kennard is. You know he's a good shooter. Defensively, in terms of team defense, if you have concerns there, that's understandable. He's not the best player in that way, or at least he hasn't been consistently throughout his career, especially on the point of attack. There are reasons to be less than optimistic that he's going to be able to contribute in those areas. But he puts up buckets and bunches from beyond the arc. You can't have it all, right? You can't have it all. And Kennard, this season in particular, is actually doing better than he has in recent seasons, especially in terms of steal percentage. So he's middle of the road, 42nd percentile, according to Cleaning the Glass, in that area. He's definitely not going to light the world on fire. I'm not trying to make it sound like he will. But he is a middle of the road to below average defender. Teams are going to try to pick on him, and I think that's understandable. He doesn't have that athleticism that you'd like to see. But in terms of his net rating, his differential, his efficiency differential with the Los Angeles Clippers, he was at a plus 8.1. That puts him in the 90th percentile in the entire NBA. 90th percentile in 720 minutes played. Now, he wasn't always with the starters, right? He had a different role in this process with the Clippers than maybe he had before. And that's important to point out. Kennard was a guy that only started 11 games this season for the Clippers. Only 11 games. So he was off the bench for a majority of the time that he was building up this impressive net rating. Now, I know sometimes with the Clippers, it's fun to make a joke. Oh, well, Kawhi Leonard was playing off the bench in some of those games. But you can't make the excuse that Kennard was putting up these numbers because he was a starter. He did a lot of his work as a reserve, and it's impressive work in terms of his net rating. Defensively, opposing teams are 7.3 points worse when Kennard is on the floor compared to when he's off it. So that is kind of a telling stat. And it'll be interesting to hear the rationale from the Grizzlies as they progress and introduce Kennard. Will he be active on Friday? DeMichael will likely have more information for us on that when that time comes. But I'm not nearly as negative about this deal as I've seen some other people being. I am not as down on what Memphis is trying to do. I get why they're doing what they're doing. They are still trying to walk that line. They're trying to find that path to contendership while not sacrificing their future. And that's exactly what they've done. Cap flexibility is still there. Draft pick flexibility is still there. You can argue that Kennard, at his $15 million roughly cap hit going into next season, he might be a Dylan Brooks replacement. And now you have Dylan gone and you find somebody else or some other way to put money into that spot. So it opens up a lot more possibilities. It's not outside of the realm of possibility that Dylan stays. But again, John Morant, Luke Kennard, Dylan Brooks, Steven Adams, Santi Aldama. When those guys are playing together, you've got some spacing, you've got some balance, you still got strong defense. When you've got Kennard out there with Bane, maybe Tyus can't be your point guard, right? Maybe you let Bane or Kennard do some creativity off the dribble. It gives you flexibility. It gives you a true eighth man that can contribute about 20 minutes a game off the bench. Once you get to the playoffs, Tyus, Kennard, Clark, Santi Aldama for sprinkles. You weren't going to be able to get OG Anunoby, it seems. Mikal Bridges was always kind of a pipe dream. Here's an option that makes you better, gets you in a position to compete as best you can going into a season where the Suns are clearly all in, the Warriors are getting active, you've got, obviously, Denver at the top of the conference. The Grizzlies are still nearing their prime window of contention. They've done nothing to sacrifice that, and that's reason to be optimistic. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies was brought to you by FanDuel. Big fan of FanDuel. Can't stress that enough. Make sure you are checking out FanDuel wherever you can, however you get your betting information. It should come from FanDuel moving forward. And obviously the Super Bowl is coming up. You can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Again, we're excited about this partnership at Locked On because FanDuel is the number one sports book in America. And if you're new to it, you get that no-sweat first bet that makes betting on sports so fun and so easy. The FanDuel app is safe, it's secure, and again, easy to use. Plus, you get paid your winnings instantly. Super Bowl's coming up. Trade deadline just passed. The NBA is about to kick into even more of a full gear. Join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/LockedOn to claim your no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you for joining me on this brief episode of Locked On Grizzlies. It is much appreciated. This is an additional episode, I want to stress, so don't panic, don't freak out, thinking, oh my gosh, are they going to talk more about this? Is DeMichael going to be there? Is Joe going to be able to call him handsome again? All time will come and tell you. We are going to have a full episode going Friday morning to break down every aspect of this trade deadline for the Grizzlies, the Western Conference, the NBA at large. There's plenty to discuss, and we will do so on our next episode. But I wanted to make sure I talked to you as quick as I could about this Luke Kennard situation. I'm optimistic. I think that they're in a good place, and I think that this makes them better. You roll the ball out, you compete as best you can. You are not going to accelerate this front office's timeline for anybody, but at least they showed the need to address a need. They got better today. Take solace in that. Until next time, which will be sooner rather than later, I'm Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in, Grizzlies fans. This is Locked On Grizzlies.